We're all good. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Josiane, and the title of my capstone is Assessing Glyphosate Impacts on Fire Occurrence in Alberta's Boreal and Foothills Forests. And my supervisor is Ben. So my study area is located in northwest central Alberta near Grand Prairie and Whitecourt. My study area is more than 250,000 hectares large, and it spans throughout more than 10,000 blocks. My study area overlaps more than 3 of Alberta's 6 types of natural regions. Natural regions are just a type of land classification that they use in Alberta based on things like climate and geology and landform. So 10% of Alberta's total natural regions are classified as foothills, and this makes up more than 70% of my study area. 60% of Alberta's natural regions are boreal, which is about 30% of my study area. And then about 7% is Rocky Mountain, which is only about 1% of my study area. If you're wondering what foothills are, they are a bit of a transition region between the Rocky Mountains and the boreal regions. They're classified by lodgepole pine as kind of like an indicator species, and they have lots of rolling hills and plateau topography. Boreal, as we know, has short summers, long cold winters, and lots of aspen, poplar, black and white spruce. And then Rocky Mountain is high elevation, glacial valleys, cold temperatures, and many alpine species. Natural regions in Alberta are further divided into natural subregions. Here I have 8 natural subregions, where foothills is divided into upper and lower foothills. Boreal is divided into dry mixed wood, central mixed wood, lower boreal highlands, and upper boreal highlands. And then Rocky Mountain is divided into alpine and montane. Most of my study area is in the foothills subregion, but it's kind of spread out pretty well. Wildfires are a major feature of the natural disturbance regimes in boreal forests and in much of Alberta. Conifer-dominated stands are known to host frequent and high-intensity ground fires. Over the last 6 years in Alberta, there's been an average of more than 600,000 hectares every year that's burned. And in Canada, wildfires have become a topic of increasing concern as both fire occurrences and area burned have been showing increasing trends over the last 50 years. And these trends are predicted to become further intensified through climate change. So glyphosate is a non-selective herbicide, which works by inhibiting a specific enzyme in plants that is required for growth and protein synthesis. After application, plants will wilt and die over the course of a week or two, and then look like this. 97% of glyphosate use in Canada is, of herbicide use in Canada is glyphosate-based. Common brand names are Roundup, Vision, and Vision Max. And then more than 90% of herbicide application in Canada is done using aerial spray. This glyphosate was owned by Monsanto for a very long time, and then was then purchased by Bayer in 2018. Usage of glyphosate became really popular for use in forestry in the early 90s. Between 2000 and 2015, more than approximately 500,000 hectares were herbicide treated in Alberta. The main purpose of using glyphosate is to reduce the presence of pioneer species like aspen regeneration and noxious grasses like new-joint wheatgrass to improve the survival and growth rates of newly planted trees in silviculture. In my study area, 80,000 hectares have been sprayed with glyphosate since 1998, which is about 30% of my whole study area. There's been an increasing number of protests in recent years throughout the country relating to the use of glyphosate in forestry. People have concerns about its effects on wildlife, it entering the food chain, threatening traditional Indigenous food sources and polluting waterways. There have been claims in the news circulating recently about herbicides contributing to increased trends of wildfires. These claims have to do with the idea that herbicides are used to reduce deciduous species and favor the growth of conifers for forest industry, and conifers are notoriously more flammable. Although there's no current research on this specific relationship in Canada. So with that being said, my research questions are, does glyphosate treatment affect fire occurrence on the block level? Does this result change geographically depending on natural region and natural subregion? And does time since spray affect these results? So my spatial data for spray and block areas was sourced from forest industry. The Alberta region, subregion, and wildfire data is open access from the Alberta government. It's available online. I'm only looking at blocks which were first harvested, then planted, and then sprayed, and only sprayed with glyphosate. So data for the subset starts in 1998 and goes until 2024. All blocks which were counted as sprayed and burned, sprayed before they burned. And I did all my spatial analysis in ArcGIS Pro, and my statistics were done in RStudio. So throughout the whole study area, there were 66 fires which burned more than 1,600 blocks. 22% of these fires happened on spray blocks, and 77% happened in unsprayed blocks. I did a Pearson's chi-square test on the overall fire occurrences between sprayed and unsprayed blocks, which was significant. And the Pearson residuals show that unsprayed blocks burned more than the expected values with this high positive residual, and spray treated blocks burned less than the expected values with this strong negative residual. So more fires than expected in unsprayed blocks and less fires than expected in sprayed blocks. This is showing the percent contributions to the total chi-squared statistic. We can see that the sprayed and burned cell on the bottom right contributes the most to the total chi-squared, so it's 57% of that stat. Now, looking at this on the natural region scale, there were no fires in the Rocky Mountain natural region. Most fires happened in the foothills region, and about 30% happened in Boreal. I then did a Pearson's chi-squared for both of the natural regions, both of which were significant. Here are the Pearson residuals in both regions showed the same general trend as the overall chi-squared did, where unsprayed blocks burned more than the expected values and have a high positive residual, and then sprayed blocks burned less than the expected values and have a strong negative residual. And again, this is showing the percent contributions to the chi-squared, where we see both of these burned cells contributing very strongly to that statistic. Now, further dividing this result into natural subregion, we can see most of the fires happened in the lower foothill subregion, but there's lots of fires spread throughout. The results of the chi-squared that I did on natural subregion showed significance for 3 out of the 5 subregions, meaning that these 3 had differences in fire occurrence between treatment types, but dry mixed wood and lower foothills did not. This could be a result of sample size. And the pattern for the Pearson residuals here is the same as we saw in the other 2 tests, where unsprayed blocks burn more than the expected values and have a very high positive residual, and then spray treated blocks burn less than expected with these strong negative residuals. And again, this shows percent contributions, the same pattern. The 2 burned cells account for the majority of the chi-squared statistic on every single significant subregion. I also did a logistic regression on time since spray to see if the amount of years since spray treatment affected fire occurrences. This result was not significant. The regression curve on the left here is flat, meaning that there's no clear pattern indicating that time since spray had an effect on occurrences. But it is important to note that blocks which were sprayed and burned, the mean amount of time since spray was around 12, and the maximum amount of years was 24. So these results aren't necessarily what I was expecting to find, but they do make sense. They're likely due to the fact that herbicides kill plants, which ultimately reduces live fuel loads. Studies show that herb and grass layers are significantly reduced within the first 5 years post-glyphosate application. And shrubs are an important fuel in forest fires. They contain a lot of dry fuels inside of their shrub layers, and they can create ladder effects, connecting surface fires into larger crown fires. So by knocking back these shrub and grass layers, there's just less available fuels overall. There are also studies which support that herbicide spray reduces fuel loads, specifically in younger stands. There's a study by McGinnis et al. In 2010, which showed reduced fuel loads in recently sprayed stands, but a reversal of this effect in older stands around the year 17. So older herbicide-treated stands hosted densely packed conifers, which then yielded higher fuel loads. While my results didn't show significance for time since spray, it's possible that these effects would emerge in years beyond my current study timeframe, such as 30, 40, or even 50 years later when canopy closure becomes tighter. Lastly, my limitations. While many of my results were significant, it's important to note that fire occurrences are stochastic in nature and very difficult to predict. There's a lot of complicated factors that contribute to a fire happening. This is the fire behavior triangle. It shows three of the most influential aspects of fire behavior, which are fuel, weather, and topography. So I'm partially accounting for fuel and topography by assessing this on the regional scale, but I'm not accounting for weather at all in my analysis, which is one of the most important facets of fire. So more research in this topic is really needed, especially in accounting for fire weather. These are my references. And yeah, thank you to Daniela for helping me along the way, and Patrick and Mike Watton, and my supervisor Ben, and everybody. It's awesome.
Thank you, and I neglected to mention that that's cross-section of next year's Capstone presenters are in the room, so it's nice to see. Right, so the first question will go to Rowan Skeavington.
Sure, yeah. Can everybody hear me?
I can hear you.
Perfect. Hi, Josiane. It's been a while.
Hey.
I was just wondering, did you notice any difference in the data based on target species sprayed? Because we target either grass or aspen based on a percentage in our blocks. So was there a difference in fire occurrence based on whether we sprayed for grass, calamagrostis, or leafy, broadleafed or softwoods, hardwoods?
I didn't actually look at the target species. I was just looking at like overall spray treatment. But if I were to guess, I think that spraying for shrubs would probably have a bigger effect because the grasses tend to come back more quickly after herbicide treatment.
Right on. Oh, thank you. Yeah, good presentation.
Thank you.
Ben.
Thank you, Josiane, for the presentation. Really interesting looking at you on this question because, you know, by all expectations, we could think the herbicide spray is due to more monitoring, more frequently, and some relationship. But you pointed out a couple of relationship factors to way. But my first question is, along with those significant less than expected fires in sprayed lots, what do you think is the driver for having more than expected fires in unsprayed lots? And looking at it through the fire triangle, through the fuel rates. People may not know that, you know, many of these blocks, there's one standing losing fuel. And you know, that's fuel. So maybe you can expand on it.
I think the reason why unsprayed blocks had more than expected occurrences, I don't necessarily think it has more to do with larger extinct residuals. Because if those got sprayed, they would then die and then be dead fuel instead of a live fuel, which is like more flammable. So I do think it just has to do with shrub layers and having plants, you know, they have lots of like rose and Labrador tea and raspberries, which really just flood these areas. And I think knocking those back with glyphosate is really where this impact is coming from.
Very good.
More questions for Josiane. Yes.
Thanks for the addition. You think these sprayed and the unsprayed blocks are essentially like the equivalent population at the beginning? Or is there other factors that make them different in why they choose to spray them or not, which could also affect their sensitive burden?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess, more of the spray blocks would have been recently logged. Because most of the time they're spraying, all of the data that I included that was sprayed happened after logging. But many of the blocks which weren't sprayed might have been logged a longer amount of time ago. So there could be a difference there where there's less fuels because they were all clear cut. So yeah, that's a good question.
Good one. I was waiting for you, Sean.
Yeah, along those lines, I wonder about, there'll be more frequent logging in accessible areas on low topography. And so if they look at geographic differences in emission sources, that would also play a large role, and that's something we would probably have to look at to try to form for that. So if you looked at geographic region, you show similar kinds of geographic regions, let's say top field elevation and or some measure of emission probability.
Yeah, it would be really nice to look at ignition. I was more looking at area burned of like overlap with the blocks and not the ignition points. So it would be cool to see which ones the ignition points took more than others based on geographic factors. Yeah, I didn't account for that. But much of the foothills natural region is like, there's a lot of human activity there. There's a lot of pipeline work in these areas. And so there's roads everywhere, clear cuts everywhere, a lot of oil sites, which have, yeah, like pretty intensive land use.
Thanks, Josiane. It is a very cool review. And I was wondering not so much about your research, but whether your research has implications for other geographic locations. Do you think you can extrapolate from Alberta and the foothills to, like, I look at places like Quebec who have banned the use of glyphosate. And so your story actually says, hey, maybe you should look at that. Maybe we get that comment.
Yeah, no, the reason why I wanted to do this subject for my capstone is because I started hearing about this relationship. I'm from Nova Scotia, and it's like there's so much happening there with glyphosate right now. But it's a different forest type. It's not boreal, it's mixed wood. And so the claims of like all of the deciduous being removed to favor conifers, which isn't really the natural forest composition there, there's probably more value to that than there is in a boreal region, where at late succession you have a conifer dominated stand regardless. But in terms of Quebec, it's a bit of like a trade-off. I know they've kind of just replaced spraying with really intensive site prep. So they're doing a lot of like mounding and trenches, pretty deep trenches, which obviously have just different impacts where you're kind of destroying the forest floor. It's a lot of disturbance. Yeah, it's a context-based thing, I don't know, it's all trade-off.
More study needed.
Well, that was a follow-on. Like,
Oh, hang on, Sandy.
that was.
That's gonna sit very far away.
You don't have to go to the gym. Now, this week. But yeah, I just make me wonder whether, like, I guess it's, now I forget my question. Oh, the literature, like, what is there out there, like, I mean, yes, in other places, but, and surely others have, there's Alberta unique.
I haven't been able to find very much literature, like shockingly low amounts on the relationship between like herbicide use and fire. There was like one study that stood out to me the most, which was done in Sierra Nevada. And they compared herbicide treated stands to salvage log stands post-fire. We did this in 3 different areas. They all had fires different periods of time. So there was one that burned more recently, one kind of middle range, and then one that burned like 20 years ago. And this is kind of what I'm basing my discussion off of, but they had less fuel loads in their super young stands, but then the oldest stand had the reverse effect of herbicide treatment. But that's one of the very few papers that I've seen out there. There's also ones on the reduction of, there's an invasive grass in Hawaii, so they sprayed for that as well, and it showed reductions, but then you have dead grasses instead of live grasses. So yeah, it's complicated.
Good questions. More questions for Josiane. Yes, Matthew.
So I was just wondering, how would you, with looking at like the effects of like the use of shit, how would you determine like because of feel because like using a pump,
Can you, sorry, I can't hear you so well.
I was just thinking, how would you determine if if the right distribution was affecting that's like the others producing more fuel for the bias versus it was actually like spraying of these guys, which is acting more like a I don't know, just like the chemical itself was having an impact on force.
Yeah, that's a good question. I do think it has to do more with fuels than the chemical itself. The chemical is like absorbed into the plant and then kind of not that traceable within a couple of years. It also suspends in soil very well, to my understanding. So it would be suspended within like something that's moist. So I'm not sure that the chemical itself would be contributing very much.
Any further scrutiny? Okay, then.
Final question, I promise. What you've learned through this study, knowing what you've learned through this study, what kind of recommendations would you make to people who go to continue to pursue this question as to whether or not the right decision is going to be to notify it from all the landscape?
I would, in my like dream world, I think it would be awesome to have like fixed area plots that are being prescribed burned. And then with like a really nice unit of replications that you can directly compare a very similar area. One that isn't sprayed, one that is sprayed, and then you can also do that throughout longer periods of time. There's also, it would be nice to have more research on the long-term impacts of glyphosate on stand structure at maturity. So since glyphosate became really popular like in the 90s, a lot of these stands are what, 30 years old now. So I think as time goes on, that would be something really cool to see if there's actually significantly less deciduous in these stands that were sprayed even like 40 years ago.
Another question about a comment. We have Anthony Taylor today, like that. Anthony Taylor is professor of forestry at the University of New Brunswick, forest management. He's a forest ecologist. And in fact, he experienced the media, competing across, management across, and on the side, actually reach out to him to get his input, which is really quite useful. But I'll also say that this comment, in the Brunswick context, was that we've never had CFI last year in the Brunswick legislature. It just has not happened. And when you look at the distribution of plantations, clear cut followed by planting and the treatment, it's more than the quarter of the province is forest. So there, as you know, saying that that's not our development, it's part of what's happening there, so maybe just a matter of time, get them inside and communities. And, that's why you were mentioning, there are other people looking at this, and we're seeing patterns to develop our landscapes, we haven't seen in the past, so it's a really big, area of research to pursue, so it's happening with you. Thinking.
Did you have anything to say to that?
I could, yeah.
Go ahead. We got a couple minutes.
Okay. Yeah, like Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, they're mixed wood forests, and they're kind of creating through these forestry operations where they're only really planting conifers. They're creating a boreal forest in a way, like within their pockets in their intensive regions. And so doing that and then being shocked that you have more wildfires. Like, come on. So yeah, it's a good thing to think about, and I think it's more true on the East Coast than it is maybe in boreal and foothills.
Okay, let's call it at that. Thank you very much.